Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay, and today we're going to talk about the Enneagram. And the Enneagram, very briefly, is a system of understanding your personality, and there's 9 basic personality types. And today we have as our guest Sandra Maitri, who is a spiritual teacher and knows a lot about the Enneagram. Hi Sandra.
Hello.
Now Sandra's actually written 2 books on the Enneagram, which I'm going to hold up here so you can see the books briefly, and we'll talk about these books in a little bit more detail towards the end. And Sandra, I wanted to ask you first of all, before we get into the Enneagram itself, how your spiritual adventure started. What kind of age in life were you, and what triggered it, and where did you take that adventure to start with?
Well, probably the first, what I would call spiritual experience I ever had was when I was about, I think I was about 8 years old. And I would sit in a chair and say my name over and over and over again to myself. And then I would find myself not understanding who I was anymore and kind of leaving and merging with a higher consciousness. I didn't understand it as that at the time, but I do now. And anyway, I told my mother about that experience, and she got very freaked out, and she said, I don't want to hear about this. So I pretty much forgot for a long time that there was anything else.
That's quite an evolved experience to have at an early age, isn't it?
Yeah. I read a book where one person, I think her name's Suzanne Summers. She wrote a book called Collision with the Infinite.
Suzanne Siegel, her name is.
Siegel, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I know this book, yeah.
Yeah. And she described the exact same
That's
experience.
Right. Yeah.
And I was just shocked when I read it, because I'd never heard of anyone else, who'd ever done anything like that, and I don't know where I got it from.
Yeah.
I imagine it's a past life, probably. But anyway, so then, I would say that the doors of my perception opened as a teenager in the Haight-Ashbury, which was near where I lived.
That was in California.
In California, yeah. We lived quite close to San Francisco, so I would skip out during school and go up there. And I started to see another reality, another potentiality. And at a certain point, I got really convinced that if it was really real, there had to be a way to access it directly without drugs.
So when you say you saw another reality, what do you mean by that?
I perceived it. My whole visual sense of reality changed. The way I was seeing other people was in a very altered way, I guess, in terms of conventional reality. I was basically seeing a sense of oneness.
So the interconnectedness.
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Okay.
right. And that had a really deep impact on me. And I really wasn't consciously seeking, I don't think. I was mostly consciously suffering and trying to get some help. And
so was that like hard to integrate in your life as you knew it at that time, that experience?
Yeah, it was impossible to integrate. Although the culture around me was very supportive, because I was living during the late 60s.
It's a flower power time, wasn't it? Yeah, peace and love and LSD and dope and things.
Yeah. So
and the music also was very inclusive somehow, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. And the Beatles, of course, were a very strong influence.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, in some ways, I suppose the Beatles had a lot to do with my spiritual search. Really? Yeah. I met them twice.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell us about that. How did that come about?
I was living in Bangkok. My dad was stationed over there, and There was a little tiny article in the Bangkok Post one day, and it said the Beatles are coming on their way to Australia. Do you remember the Australian tour?
Not in detail, no.
Oh, okay.
No,
But anyway,
no.
they went to Australia early on in their career. And I really didn't know anything about them, but my girlfriends knew all about them, you know.
Right.
So their father knew the Minister of Tourism in Bangkok, and we got press passes, and we got to go out to the plane. So we gave them flowers, you know, and we were on the TV and stuff. And for a 15-year-old, it was just incredible.
Unbelievable, yeah, yeah.
And then one day after school, I was sitting around with my girlfriend, and I said, well, you know, if they went that way, they're probably coming back this way, too. So we started going out to school. I mean, after school, we started going out to the airport every single day. And then finally, the guy at British Air one day said, well, if you don't tell anyone else, and you're here tomorrow night at such and such a time, they will be too. So we went back to the airport the next day.
And did you tell anybody else?
No, of course not.
No, because you wanted to be the exclusive
Right,
ones.
right.
Yeah.
So we got to spend an hour with them.
Fantastic,
Yeah. Yeah, so...
Was that before they discovered the Maharishi or afterwards?
Yeah, it was before.
Yeah.
It was before.
But they were moving that way somehow, weren't they?
I think they were tuned in to a whole wavelength
Yeah.
that my generation picked up on and just kind of went with.
Yeah.
So, you know, they were quite a strong formative force in my life, really.
Okay, so you were having this feeling of oneness and connectiveness,
right.
and
That's where we were.
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So where did it go next with your
Well,
journey there?
I was, let's see, the next stage I was around 20, and I was in art school in Berkeley. And I had another terrible relationship, and I was pretty miserable, and I was looking for help. And it was quite a unsought for thing, but a friend of mine came over one night with a little blurb about this guy named Claudio Naranjo, who was a very important figure in the human potential movement in the States. And he was the first person really to begin integrating spirituality and psychology. And he had worked with Fritz Perls at Esalen, so he was a Gestalt practitioner. And he was starting a group that, I mean, I was looking for a Gestalt group. That was sort of the happening therapy at the time. And he was offering a Gestalt therapy group that was also a spiritual group. And I said, well, great, you know, that sounds fabulous.
Right, bringing the two together.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I didn't really know what I was getting into at all. But I went over to his house, and he had a group of about a dozen of us there. And Hamid Ali was one of the people there, the founder of the Diamond Approach, who writes under the name of A.H. Almas.
Right.
And Claudio did what he calls trespasso. It was basically a transmission, looking into each person's eye and transmitting being, consciousness.